Thank you, Ben, and welcome everybody. So yes, my name is Neil Clements. I'm a partner in Deloitte's economics business, focusing on the TMT sector. And I'm joined today by an exceptional panel of speakers. Firstly, Alain Herrmann, Data Protection Commissioner for the National Commission for Data Protection in Luxembourg. By Federico Milani, Deputy Head of the Data Policy and Innovation Unit, DG Connect. Member of European Parliament, Axel Voss, and Professor Christiane Wendehorst, Scientific Director at the European Law Institute. And this panel will explore some important themes around what happens next in the data regulatory environment. And that will explore questions such as how can data regulation evolve to improve access, fairness and certainty, but still, stimulating competitive markets, looking at the challenges and opportunities of interoperability, and more broadly, the concerns around data sharing for both public and private sector organisations. So we'll start with some perspectives from the panel on where we are now and how we got there, and then we'll explore some of the specific challenges around what comes next. But Christiane, if you wouldn't mind to turn to you first to just set out your thoughts on where we've got to so far. The EU has been extremely active in the field of data legislation over recent years. It would be good to get your take on those developments.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Niels, and thank you for having me on this panel. I think living in Europe nowadays, this is one of the most exciting regions in the world for data regulation because the EU has been so active in regulating on data and matters relating to the data economy recently. And that is really, really important that the EU has taken, this step at regulating, because I don't have to stress that data is the lifeblood of the economies of the 21st century. So it's so extremely important that our businesses, and in particular the small and medium-sized businesses, do have access to the right quantity of data, the right quality of data, in order to boost the economy, in order to develop new innovative business models, but also to help solve the big problems of our times, ranging from the pandemic to climate change to our economic situation, which we're facing at the moment. But of course, there's also a great potential for abuse. So on the other hand, it's really, really important we protect citizens, we protect consumers, because there are also dangers involved with the use of data. And in both areas, the EU has been very, very active. So over the time, of course, the focus has changed. So we've seen the first paradigm of protection. So that was the General Data Protection Regulation. Then later endeavors to also have an e-privacy regulation that hasn't really fully worked out so far. So that was very much focusing on protection. We had a principle of data minimization there. We had privacy by default. We had other paradigms and principles that were very much focused on protection. And then gradually that changed. We had the insight that we need more data for our economies. So we had, for example, the free flow of data regulation, the open data directive, as endeavors to open up data for our economies, for research and innovation. But this second generation of legislation that has still, tried to keep the data economy, to restrict the data economy to non-personal data. And it was only later in the third generation, if I'd like to say so, of data-related regulation that the EU has really made an effort to also integrate personal data in data economy related legislation and to try and make a data economy also with personal data possible. And of course, that needs safeguards. And this is one of the main topics at the moment. What kind of safeguards of different nature can we put in place to have a data economy also with personal data? Now, if you ask me whether I'm happy with the developments, I think it was so important that the EU really was the first mover here in a variety of different aspects. And so I think I'm very happy that the EU did take the initiative and developed all these pieces of legislation. However, I'm getting a little bit concerned, I have to say, about the pace at which this is happening and about consistency. So we're seeing horizontal instruments, we're seeing sectoral instruments, we are seeing instruments that are really totally focused on protection. We are seeing instruments that are focused on data sharing. And we see instruments that are developed by different DGs of the European Commission, by different departments within a DG. So there is really now, I feel, an issue of consistency. There's more than 10 really big data-related pieces of legislation. And at the moment, we really need to pause and make sure all these pieces of legislation fit nicely with each other so that we really get it right. And so at the moment, I'm really a little bit concerned whether we, whether the bigger picture is still fitting. So I think a little bit more reflection at the moment, and really trying to get it right so that all the bits and pieces fit together would be of utmost importance.
Thank you, Christiane. That's a really useful framework for thinking about this. You know, the evolution from, as you said, protection to free flow, then forward to thinking about how we might integrate personal data but maintain the safeguards. Alain, from your perspective as someone tasked with the supervising element of this, where do you see the key challenges to date, and how do we expect those to evolve?
Well, thank you, Neil. Well, as a supervisory authority, we are daily confronted to new challenges. In order to supervise enforcement of the GDPR, we are confronted to new situations, new technologies, new innovative projects, new court decisions, and this almost on a daily basis. So it means that we have to constantly develop our knowledge, to constantly improve our knowledge. Not only us, but also the actors. All the actors which are in this ecosystem. Also knowing that for what regards data protections, for supervising in let's say supervising data protection in health sector is different from supervising data protection in the banking sector, which is even different from the e-commerce sector, and so on. So this creates a real challenge, which requires a lot of human resources to be successful. Also, another challenge, and this was also already mentioned by the previous speaker, is the consistency on the EU level. So the previous speaker spoke about the consistency between the legislations, which could, of course, also be difficult for us about interpretations. But we also have to be consistent in the way we interpret operationally all these texts. Meaning having positions, common positions between 27 countries, EA countries, sometimes also the E-commissions, is very challenging and time consuming. So this also requires human resources to be very effective. Another challenge that we had and that we still will probably have with the new legislations is the disparity of supervising authorities. With that, I mean that if there are, let's say, authorities that are named to which have some powers or some duties to perform for processings related to personal data, they will be confronted to the data protection authorities. They will not act necessarily in the same board like the EDPB, and therefore also to find common position and to find clarity and certainty to the field, it's also going to be challenging. It could even be more challenging if there are in this consistency challenge also some contradicting legislations, and like what we saw with the e-privacy, for example, where the e-privacy legislation is from 2005, and it's no more compatible with the GDPR. There are some contradictions between the text, which makes it quite difficult also to have to provide some common position and certainty for the field. So all that said, it's very interesting, very challenging to go on. I think it will take some time until we have a satisfying level of maturity at EU level for all this ecosystem to work efficiently with all these new legislations that are upcoming. And so for us, what does it mean? But we will probably, as data protection supervisor, receive new missions. So it will even broader, let's say, the kind of knowledge that we need to have in order to make our work correctly. But we can achieve this by facing all these challenges all together. So yeah, I will stop my discussions there because I think there will be many interesting inputs with the upcoming people on that topic.
Thanks, Alain. And interesting to see how that consistency challenge then feeds through to the resource question as well. But Federico, from your perspective, with a particular focus on innovation, we have a particular challenge here with a very fast-moving environment, very agile investors, and very agile creators thinking about how to make good use of data. From your perspective, how can policy and legislation help promote innovation?
Well, thank you very much for having me. And I just take up what Christiane and Alain was saying. It's a very, as you said, a fast-moving environment. So it's extremely difficult for keeping up the pace, also from the legislative point of view. But we, as responsible of the data strategy and then responsible of the Open Data Directive, the Data Act, and the DGA, we are really trying to make sure that there will be access for data within the basic rule and the basic principle that Europe is proud of, which is the respect of privacy and the respect of the use of personal data. In fact, all the activities that we are doing are based also, when we are talking about the personal data, on the GDPR, which remains the cornerstone on how we want in Europe treat data. And if you read all our legislation and initiatives are really making sure that control of the data remains to who has generated the data. So in the Data Act, for example, who has generated the data by using a device, by buying using a device, will have the possibility of choosing of giving access to this data to other third parties so that they can use the data. On the other hand, we give also the possibility to the manufacturer to have a control on that data and make sure that that data, if given to other third party, will not be used in a competitive manners to compete on the services that they are offering. So the basic idea and the difficulties that we've got in doing all this piece of legislation and coordinating the various activities and initiatives that are going now is really to make sure that everything has got, all the proposal has got a certain consistency, but also all the basic principles that has been set up will be followed. It's a tough work. We are doing it. We are trying to do it, but we have to keep up with the pace of the market. And this is why, as Christiane was saying, we have managed to deliver what also our commissioner was asking, a framework for having access or more access to this data, but also more control on who can get or who use the data and for which purposes. And I stop there, otherwise I will take all the time.
Thanks, Federico. And I see we've had a question come in. I will touch on that later, as we were definitely coming to that question. And certainly, please do provide other questions as they arise, and we'll do our best to get to those. But I mean, Axel, we have already touched on the role and impact of GDPR briefly. but it'd be really good to get your thoughts on the role and impact of GDPR to date in addressing the issues we've discussed so far, and then later on we can think about what might happen next.
So thanks, Neil, for the introduction and also for the invitation. Because I'm always criticizing the GDPR as it stands right now, let me say some words before. Data protection is a must and always remain an essential element of our democratic system. And the GDPR also stands for major improvement for the right to privacy. So critics on this shouldn't be interpreted as that we do not want, or I do not want data protection. This is not what I'm intending to say, but I have the feeling that the data protection is at the same time abridges other fundamental rights and leads to extreme compliance costs and its explosion, and also hampers Europe's digital transformation. So we owe it to our citizens also to acknowledge these facts and start fixing the GDPR-related problems through legal adjustments as well as better guidance. So what we need here is a kind of a new mindset, I would say, when it comes to the use of data. And of course, this also implements a kind of a better and a more flexible legislator, that if we are seeing a problem, we just have to fix it and not waiting years and years in trying to fix it in another way. No, we should do it immediately. And so from my point of view, the GDPR fails to clarify that data protection is not an absolute fundamental right, but should also instead balance other fundamental rights. And on a second level, we have our problems now with the competition situation. So if we also would like to lead in a digital way, then of course Europe can provide to the world a lot if we are implementing, or if we are linking values with technology, but this has to be done in the same time like other regions are doing this without the values. So we need to be faster, we need to speed more up. And here I see a lot of problems. At first, the uniform application of GDPR throughout the EU. On a second level, I would say there's a lack of guidelines. There is a need for better guidelines, more practical orientated guidelines. Probably also we need more legal clarity in the text. And also we haven't discussed at the time when we created this GDPR something like artificial intelligence, something like blockchain, something like cloud computing. So there are some problems in adapting new technologies to the GDPR, and here we should fix also these. And in general, of course, but this is going beyond all this political courage and will, what I'm seeing to correct the GDPR. So this would be also discussing the basic principles and the basic structure. If we are looking to the data-driven world we are into, we are now creating, instead of balancing the GDPR, we are creating now something what should circumvent the GDPR, like the Data Act or like the Data Governance Act and so on, that I haven't seen this anywhere else. So we have created already a mentality in not sharing and probably not processing, going beyond a kind of a certain limit in processing data or also sharing data. And now we are trying to circumvent, because we are seeing data might be quite helpful in a data-driven world. And so that's why some principles, what we have implemented in this Article 5 is like data minimization. Today, if we are looking to artificial intelligence, we need a lot of data. And if we're thinking to the results of algorithms, we do not want to have this bias. We do not want to have this discriminatory. So therefore, you will need a lot of personal data, and the GDPR is not providing these. But if we are not getting this right, also from a competition point of view, we will not be leading in AI. And that's why the next in very disruptive step like the metaverse, then we are totally out, because we are not providing data, we are not providing artificial intelligence. And this is driving me a little bit crazy, because we should also try to be a player. And this can't be done if we are sticking to the GDPR and the interpretation what we are delivering right now to Europe. So we have a lot of issues to discuss, and also data minimization and data deletion, and just processing data to one purpose. Yes, it's wonderful to have these principles for data protection, but it's not good to have these for a data-driven world. And so we need to balance this better. And this is what I'm criticizing all the time. And just saying, oh, we have to wait. No, time is running. The developments are going on. And Alain and Federico was saying, oh, yes, the developments are very speedy, and they're coming up a lot of problems. But where is our political courage, our political will to balance this better and to give more clarity to everyone who's dealing with data?
Thanks, Axel. And as you say, there's a number of tensions in the way in which the data legislation is being managed, and that the imperative to share data and create value is absolute, but there is absolutely those challenges as well. So, Christiane, I mean, if we think about as we go forward, we've seen different paradigms in data law, open by default versus privacy by default. Where do you see the sort of tensions between them, and how they might, be resolved as we go forward, thinking about how we're going to, make use of some elements of personal data in this context while still making the necessary protections?
Yeah, thank you so much. I can basically build on what other speakers have already said. I mean, there is this obvious tension, right? So on the one hand, we need the data as a lifeblood for our economies. And on the other hand, we know there is much room for abuse. There is a need for protection. And let me stress that it's not just privacy. So we're always focusing on privacy and data protection, but it's not just that. It's also intellectual property protection. It's national security. It's competition. So just replace privacy by default with protection by default. And then you have really the tension between the two goals we need to achieve. What kind of strategies are out there to kind of manage this tension? We started with something which was maybe a non-strategy, which was the without prejudice to strategy, I always call it. That we just had a data sharing legislation alongside the protection legislation, and we just put in a small clause saying, this data sharing legislation is without prejudice to the GDPR and without prejudice to all the rest of it. And that is, of course, very easy to legislate, but it then shifts the burden to those who have to apply the law. And it creates all this uncertainty on the ground. How do you deal with that? So, but it's a formula which we still find in many pieces of legislation, this without prejudice to formula. So that was a first strategy, but it really shifts the burden of figuring out what it means to those who have to apply it, and ultimately to the businesses and organizations throughout Europe. And then the second strategy was that of having organizational, technological, and legal safeguards. And I would like to mention the Data Governance Act, for example. I'm very happy. I was in 2017, I was advising Andrus Ansip at the time, and I was, already promoting what I called data trusteeship back then as a means to kind of reconcile data economy and data protection. I'm very happy that at least part of this is now, we see that as data intermediaries in the Data Governance Act. I think data intermediates, data trust structures can really be one means of managing this tension. And also we see very, very interesting mechanisms in the European health data space, or the proposal for a European health data space, with a lot of very innovative checks and balances and safeguards. So there is this approach to kind of solve the problem by way of organizational, technological, and legal safeguards. And then we have now the third approach, I would like to say, the one taken by the Digital Markets Act, and more notably still by the Data Act. And this is the one also which Federico had talked about. This is the one that looks at co-generated data, and I'm happy again that this term, which was coined by the American Law Institute and European Law Institute, is now taken up by the European legislator, and that we are seeing those portability rights as a means to kind of open data up in a way that still respects individual rights. Of course, that is not without any problem. So we also need to make sure that portability rights are not at the expense of protection which we need. But I think it's a third strategy we see, and a combination of all these strategies that's kind of pursued in a somewhat consistent manner can be a way to solve it. But there is still a lot to do, I would like to say. We're still not there, so it's still a tension.
Thanks. Yes, no, absolutely. So Federico, just turning back to you, and because there was a lovely phrase used in one of the panels earlier about company shyness when it comes to sharing data, notwithstanding the belief in the potential benefits of data sharing. I'd like to share your data, but I'm quite happy to be a little shy about sharing mine. To what extent does that shyness differ between private and public sector organisations in your experience? And what do we need to be thinking about in context of companies looking to offer new services and use data for different purposes from the purpose from which it has been collected?
Well, that one is one of the main issues that we are tackling exactly with all our initiatives. It's as you said, there are a lot of companies that are happy that others shares their data, but they are not willing to share their own data because of fear that the data will be used for entering in direct competition with all their services and their product. This is why we already in 2018 we were talking about setting up what we call a data space, a market for sharing data, where still the data holder or the organization that has produced the data, irrespective if it is personal or non-personal data, has got control to whom the data is going to and for which purpose. We are not setting up, there are technologies that are being developed, and we are funding this type of technology through our research activities, but we are not setting up a new legislative framework in a sort of sense. We are again because of what the stakeholders tell us, we are reinforcing what should be the contractual arrangement that should be put in place between the data holder and data users. In a way that data can be used and can be shared in a trusted manner. Trust is one of the major issues that we see when it comes to share data. But we are tackling that one. Yeah, please. Go ahead, Neil.
No, I think trust was a key theme that we discussed previously, and also it's come out of some of the panels earlier on today, and the need to build that absolutely. Alain, turning back to you, I mean, we've talked about a couple of the themes that can underpin the next step in legislation, but how would you like to see legislation evolve to stimulate data sharing specifically, and thereby to drive innovation in the use of data?
Well, from my point of view, I would first be happy about some stability. So now we're speaking about evolving our legislation. Okay, there are many new legislations are coming in order to share the data and to make data-driven business. So let's try first to stabilize them on an operational level. So regarding also some remarks that have been made by the other speakers just before me, I tend to agree with Mr. Voss about the symptoms of the GDPR and the problems, but not necessarily of the cause and about how to do it. I also often hear critics about the GDPR, like it's too strict, too complex to understand. It blocks us from processing personal data. It blocks us to develop services, or whatever reason. But for me, the problem is not the text by itself. It's about development of the knowledge about all the actors involved. In order for it to work, and I think that will be the case for any legislation that is going to be developed, it requires cultural changes in company, cultural changes from top management. They need to understand what it is about. If they take a legislation with the objectives to just comply with the legislation because I have to comply with it, it will fail. They have to also to know this legislation, what it can bring, the added value that the legislation can bring, like the GDPR, in order, and this was mentioned by Federico just before, to create trust in the processing of the data, in trust in the services that they develop with the processing of the data. And that needs also to be honest trust. And honest trust means transparency. And that's not necessarily easy for many organizations, let's say, to be transparent. So whatever the text is, I think, in order to achieve that, in order to have data-driven economy and in respect with our European values, which is also what GDPR, for example, is about, I think that there needs to be an active support from any actors of the European level, like political, legislative, organizations, supervisory authorities, citizens. We need to support where we want to go all together, and we need to support the values that we want to bring into this processing. And this is challenging, yes, because not everyone has the same views. We have companies from other continents which may not have the same views too, and but that's, I think, where there is a key point in order to achieve success and to achieve what you want to achieve on the European level. Because just with text or new text or evolution of text, I'm not sure it will work if there is not this common view, this common support.
Sure. Well, Axel, I think that leads quite nicely, coming back to you then, to sort of reflect on the themes in the conversation today. And I'll say after your comments, I do want to touch on the specific question from the floor, because I think it then builds on this. But I mean, from your perspective, to address some of the issues that we've discussed today, how would you like to see GDPR and wider data policy evolve going forward?
So, of course, I'm approaching these in these days more from this part. Do we want to survive digitally, and what role we would like to play? And if we are continuing like what we are doing, then nothing will change. Probably there is no success. There is no economical success, and there won't be kind of a digital success. So that's why I think we have to change our way of thinking. Yes, I agree. Trust is a very important point. But if I'm looking now to all these clients or consumers, then they might have lot of trust in American companies like Google, Facebook, and because they have the most consumers there, and so it seems they are sharing with them a lot of data, but so it seems that the trust is on their side somehow if we are just looking to the practical way forward. So I totally agree that stability would be something, but the environment is so developing in a way that we have to face again and again new problems. And even metaverse will be the next big step forward. And also there, I'm asking myself how we will control data protection there, how we can manage these in such an environment. So this is also something we have to think about. Consistency, it was mentioned before. Yes, I agree. I cannot really see a kind of a consistent legislator. If we are coming to e-privacy, since 2017, we have a proposal on the table. And if I'm looking to this right now, and especially the approach by the parliament, I would say this is another reason probably not to win the digital race if we are continuing like this. So again, I think we have to approach this differently. Governance was also mentioned. This is probably more and more a kind of a problem with all the other legislative instruments we have decided on, like Digital Market Act, Digital Services Act, Digital Data Governance Act, the AI Act, and so on. And all of a sudden, companies might be confronted with different governance administrations, dealing also with the question of consent. So if you're looking to DMA, yes, there is what Christiane has mentioned, without prejudice to GDPR, but then regulating something about the consent. This means creating more and more uncertainties than necessary. And here I think we can be better. And also, if we are looking to the European health data spaces, and this is what I would say, if we are not finding a kind of a structure where everyone has to share its health data in a trusted way, in a way where this is safe for the privacy of everyone. But if we are not finding these, I would say other regions might have more data, and this would also mean then more knowledge, better results, and probably also better research on this. And this is, I would say, this is what we can't afford to this. We need to step up, and as soon as possible.
Sure. And so let's use that as a springboard for addressing the question from the floor, because I think it's a really interesting one and pertinent. That, you know, the question was, does the panel think that a global institutional framework for regulation is a realistic prospect? To which we might add, you know, how necessary a prospect is it, and how realistic is it? Axel, maybe while you have the floor, you could address that question, and then maybe I'll turn to Christiane.
So, of course, digital issues are global issues, so that's why it would be ideal to have a kind of a global standard setting and so on. But I see the realistic approaches so far that this is not possible to achieve because of these different interests and different approaches. So that's why at least we should come up with a kind of a, let's call Western standard situation. And this brings me also to this aspect that we need to be more active in these standardization organizations. And this is, I think it would be wonderful to come up with one standard or one level of issues where we can concentrate on, but this is not realistic right now.
Christiane.
Well, I'm afraid I kind of agree with Axel on all points. So, yeah. So it's wishful thinking, and it depends, of course, on what you have in mind. What is certainly realistic is to have something like a global set of very abstract principles such as fairness and accountability and so on, but then everybody will understand something, will understand them differently. And so the question is that really what we're looking for? Now, having said that, I think it would still be worth the effort. I'm now starting a big research project at the Academy of Sciences that's trying to kind of flesh out or find out what is the real difference in the approaches. Can we really get to a common approach or not? At the moment, I'm rather skeptical, so I'm really expecting to be more differences than similarities when you go beyond the top level principles of fairness and so on. But maybe what I could imagine is something that like joint agreement on red lines or some basic red lines, which we don't want to cross. But even that will be difficult enough. So.
And from a sort of operational perspective, Alain, Federico, to what extent is there a sort of meaningful international collaboration at the moment around, operationalization of legislation, however it might differ between regions? Maybe Alain, I can invite you to comment on that first, and we'll turn to Federico.
Yes, but this is something we are working very intensively already on the European Data Protection Board to find some common interpretation, to find the red lines for the different interpretations of principle of GDPR and so on. So, but this is a very high time consuming job. I think we managed to achieve to get those positions step by step, but there are so much to take that it takes a lot of time. And of course, in such kind of discussions, there are also cultural differences which are confronting, and we have to exchange a lot to find those acceptable common lines. In many cases, it's successful. In some cases, it's not successful. When it's not successful, I think it's even worse than the text itself, because we have a guidance which is also great, or which doesn't really take a position, which could make it also difficult. But I think we are more than 27 countries who have to work together, and if we want to go that direction, we have to do that work. And it's going to be even more challenging in upcoming times, because now with the AI regulation or all the Data Act, Data Governance Act regulation, with sharing data about pseudonymization, anonymization, and so on, this will lead a lot of these discussions.
Federico, your perspective on the global institutional question.
Well, we are working closely with other third countries, other countries on data sharing, the free flow of data, but also the use of the data. And while the clear example would be on the GDPR, and all the discussion that has been with the GDPR, but we are also opening up on the use of non-personal data. And there are a number of, as Alain was saying, there are a number of countries that are following the lead in a sort of sense, or that we are much closer to the same principle that we are using in Europe. A clear example would be the good relationship and the good work that we are doing together with Japan. There are other countries that are following a different type of perspective in the use of data, and there we are trying to find a common ground so that data can be used within again, the basic principle that Euro has put. This is why, again, Data Act, the DGA, and the GDPR applies also to those companies that are not European when they are working with Europe. So we want to find a common ground of working with data, accessing the data. And I think this is the basic principle. We are anyhow one of the biggest market in the world, so people want to use and work in Europe, but it should be with our conditions, in a sort of sense.
Sure. Okay, so there was one other question I wanted to pose to the group, because we've been thinking about this largely in context of smart cities and the benefits of collaboration across multiple public sector silos as you're looking to A, collect, B, analyze, and C, monetize data collected through smart cities. This may speak to your data spaces position, but what do you think are the barriers, but also the opportunities to greater data sharing, specifically in context of smart cities, where potentially the overlap with personal data is a little less in terms of actually where the value can be generated? So open the floor to whomever would like to take a punt at that one. You might volunteer yourself there, Axel. Yes, please do.
So, of course, also thinking in this direction is extremely helpful, because smart cities will be something what we are all thinking on, and we should also work on. But also, once again, here, consenting from the GDPR is still one thing that needs to be done. But I'm not sure if we cannot create also some technology solutions where this is better balanced at the end, that you do not have to consent all the time, but you are protected then in a different way. So this would be the balance, but this needs to be open-minded, also from a legislator side, that changing the GDPR at a certain point is necessary. And if we are not doing this, then probably smart cities might be still a kind of a good idea, but then it will be hampered in a way by the GDPR. So we need to be better, and thinking about of privacy tech as a kind of a solution also for like consent or whatever. So, and there are solutions already existing, but we need to adapt this to the GDPR from a legal point of view.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Carry on.
Maybe I can continue if you want.
Please.
Well, smart cities and GDPR, they are not incompatible. Of course, there is not only consent. There are other legal bases to achieve that. But I think data protection in this context is also very important, because smart cities will generate a lot of personal data. You can know everything that a person is doing on a daily basis. You can even see what he's going to do in the future, because you will be able to see interactions. So it's important that those activities or the legislations that may be built around these activities do already take into account the data protection by design principles since the beginning, and this can work. This is what I try to say also since the beginning. GDPR doesn't prevent from doing that kind of stuff, but yes, it has a cost. It has a cost of compliance. It has a cost to develop knowledge. But I already saw daily on the field a very successful setup of environments who process personal data which respect the rules. It took some time to build. The people needed to put the knowledge, but the result is there at the end. So again, I'm not sure we need new legislation. So what we have the elements there to achieve that.
I hope the German Data Protection Administration will follow your position.
Okay. So Carry on.
If I may, just to conclude, and there was Christiane that was mentioning already the concept of trustees. I know I'm going back to the concept of giving consent, but I wanted just to report one preliminary result that we've heard from a Polish company that is trying to enter in the concept of data altruism. So I'm sure that everybody is extremely skeptical when they think about data altruism in the field of health data, which is even more sensitive than, for example, giving access to the data in smart cities. And there, what they did, this company, what they are setting up is a data altruism organization that will collect data from patients so that then it can be reused after a consent. And what I found interesting is that while they are already they are still in the preliminary work, but what they found is that they went in a hospital and asked to the various patients consent for getting access to their health data for research purposes. And what they found interesting is that almost 40%, if I remember properly, and I'm not sure it's an official data, but quite a lot of patients give their permission. So they were saying we were expecting something like much less. Because even a 10%, even 10% of the patient would give consent of accessing their data. If you go at national level, it would be already quite a lot of data that can be then used, for example, for AI. So having this result was extremely promising. Of course, it's just a very small example and we cannot generalize, but it gives the idea that probably through consent, we can achieve what Axel would like to have, so data for innovation. This is also our belief, and we are pushing towards that direction.
Sure. Christiane, you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, just to say that, of course, I agree with Federico that, those data trusts and those data intermediaries can solve a lot of problems. I have to say that because I was arguing for the model in the first place back then. So, but of course, the problem is if you get consent from 40% of the patients, that still means the data is not complete, and that still means the data is biased. So you can do some research with the data, but it's not the full range of research which our health system might need. So this is why I'm happy to see that in the European proposal for a European health data space, there are also different approaches now being taken. So I really think that in particular in the health sector, we need also a different approach, an approach that's not exclusively based on consent, because consent creates so many problems in all directions. It's not, it's not just, consent does not just create problems for those who have to rely on consent. It also creates for those who have to give consent because they're simply overwhelmed with the decision. And so I think other avenues need to be explored there.
Yeah. I think we have a deep dive session coming up on consent later on, which will no doubt go into these issues in a bit more detail. Axel, you wanted to say?
Yes, so I would say if we would like to succeed, then I think we need a kind of an obligation for data sharing, but finding a way in not infringing the individual rights. And I think there are models already existing. And here I would say it's not enough to wait for consent. We need to have more political guidance in saying we need to come forward here and there and so on. And therefore we need a model in saying every health data need to be shared, or there's everyone obliged to do so, and then we might have a chance in also in developments and research and so on. Otherwise, we won't succeed from my point of view.
Sure. Okay, I'm just going to take it back into sort of enterprise data, conscious that otherwise we may be straying onto the ground of the panel coming later. But just some concluding remarks from each of you. If you were to look at one area where you'd like to see greater collaboration between government supervising authorities and the private sector, what do you think that the most important area is going to be in order to be able to have a framework that encourages the kind of sharing that we've been talking about today? Alain, can I turn to you first?
Yeah, well, I'm going to be very operational, let's say. I saw a very interesting proposal in the AI regulation, which is about the setup of sandbox. I'm still convinced that this kind of tool, like sandboxes, are tools where we can reunite the private sector and the different sectors and the supervisory authority, in which we can share our respective knowledge, and which we can define, let's say, compliant processing out of it. So I'm really supporting the promoting of such kind of tools where we discuss all together to find those solutions. And I think it's
excellent.
very
Yeah, I think we have a session on sandbox as well coming up. So teed that one up nicely. Federico, your final remarks.
My final remarks are, well, just to complement what has been already said. I think that the Europe is trying to be at the forefront of and trying to not to react but act, so that it can push the development of a data economy and a digital transformation in Europe, respecting the main values. So we are trying to push, we are trying to be at the forefront, we are trying to be consistent. We need, however, not only the legislation, but also that companies, industries, and individuals will accept the new way of dealing with data and having control of the data, but also having the trust in sharing the data for the benefits of creating more innovative services and better services.
Sure. And Axel, what are you looking for in terms of collaboration from the private sector?
Yeah, so of course, data sharing in the private sector would also be a kind of a good way forward in creating more added value. But also here we have to have in mind that the company data are also the company value, and also there's a limitation when it comes to trade secrets and so on. So therefore, once again, we need to find a model like to hold the data in trust or whatever. So third party might be helpful. What we have mentioned already in the Data Governance Act, this might be a way forward to have trust on the one hand side, and also the possibility to collect all the data and not giving up some secrets or individual rights, and in a way. So this might be a way forward. Probably there are other models already around, and but once again, we should be open-minded to everything.
Sure. And Christiane, final word for you.
Final word. So I basically agree with what other speakers have said. One sector that comes to my mind is now the IoT sector, and I think in particular there it's really, really important for Europe to get it right, because for a long time, we've said IoT is where Europe is strong, automobile industry and so on. This is where Europe really has its strong big players. And if we're now going to create legislation that forces those big players to open up their data treasures, that may be wonderful. It may really boost the European economy, but it may also have unintended effects. And so I think this is an area where this cooperation is particularly important, and where it's particularly important now to get it right.
Excellent. Well, in IoT, you've certainly touched a subject close to my heart. So thank you for that. And thank you to all for your time and insights this morning. I know I found that a really useful session, and I hope the audience has as well. And with that, I think we're at time. So thanks again to you all, and handing back to you, Ben.